Welcome to all the new members. To give a 1-second recap really, really quickly, last time we saw how Moshe retells a lot of the stories that happened in the second year in the Midbar, so he goes back 38 years, in order to cast himself in a different light, namely as the civil servant who's hired by the people to do his job, not as the supreme powerful prophet that we see in other books. And we spoke about how Moshe is getting ready for the people to live life without him. And his greatest fear is Chet Ha'egel 2.0 happening. And he's doing everything in his power to get them ready for that smooth transition, into the lands with Yehoshua. So today, and last time we started talking a little bit about the Brit at Har Sinai. We talked about his role at Har Sinai. That was in speech number 1. Okay, so follow along with the structure that I gave you guys here. Today, we're going to finish up that speech number 1 with a few points, and then get to the real the climax of the entire Sefer, which is the Torah. And remember, guys, in our class, Torah means law, the law book that Moshe is presenting. Okay, so keep that in mind always whenever we use the word Torah. And that really takes up the bulk of the book. We're going to spend the next 2 classes doing the Torah section right in the middle. And then our last class will be the last 2 speeches. Speech number 3 and the conclusion will wrap up the whole Sefer. Okay, so today, again, we're going to finish with speech number 1. But before we do that, I skipped something last week because we didn't have time. And then I was thinking about it the whole week, and I actually felt terrible because there's some of my favorite psukim. So indulge me for 2 minutes. I'm just going to go back to that introduction because I want to share one thing with you guys. Okay, and that is Moshe gives a little introduction to why they should keep these mitzvot. He's about to present them with the Brit. He wants them to be invested, but why? Why do they care? Why bother listening to him? What's in it for them? And I find it very fascinating that he gives 2 main reasons. Okay, look at the first set of psukim. We're in pasuk Aleph. V'ata Yisrael, shma et hachukim ve'el hamishpatim asher anochi melamed etzchem la'asot le'ma'an tichyu, that you shall live. Keep these laws because they're your lifeline. And then he goes on to tell them, he says, you guys know this because anyone who's standing right here is alive. And you're alive because you're the people that God didn't kill after they did Avodah Zarah at Baal Peor. So let's hear it for the winners. You're all alive and you know this lesson. Right? You've seen it in your actual
Avodah Zarah at Baal Peor. What is that? Sorry.
Okay, so that was an incident that happened almost like maybe just a few weeks ago, or perhaps a few months ago, where when the people came to Moab, so they're transitioning from the Midbar, going out into the general world, they're confronted with this new idolatry at Baal Peor, and the people start indulging in this idolatry. And it's kind of shocking after 40 years in the Midbar. You feel like they should have gotten the lesson. You should have been learning. Like, really, this is what you do right before you enter the lands? We're going to see that that's a theme of people messing up. And there is a great plague, and many people were killed. God kills the people who are engaging in this Baal Peor. And Moshe uses this real life example that they just happened to them. He goes, see, I told you, if you don't listen to God, he's going to kill you. Now, as an aside, it's kind of horrifying if you think about this. People just lost their neighbors and their family members, right, a few weeks ago. And Moshe is using this as a blunt reminder of got to keep those mitzvot. This sounds a little bit like Moshe is engaging in the problem of theodicy, of why good things happen to bad people and bad things to good people. And for Moshe, for the author of this text, it's a very black and white world. You do good, you get rewarded. You do bad, you get punished. All right? It's a troubling theology that I'm sure a lot of people here don't agree with, but it's important for us to get into the mindset of the author to understand his worldview and how he views keeping this brit, because that's going to become a theme that pops up a lot. But he also gives another reason. He also says in the next psukim, almost word for word, notice the nice, neat structure. Same introduction, but this time, why? because these laws are wise and they're understanding in the eyes of the Amim, the other non-Jews. This is a really interesting reason for keeping it, that other people will look at us and say, wow, those laws are brilliant. They make sense. They're moral. They look at the Bnei Israel. They created this ethical, just society. And that will reflect on God. That will be the ultimate Kiddush Hashem. So taking a step back and looking at these two reasons, one reason is internal. It's about us living. And one is external. It's about us and our relationship to the outside world. And I'm only bringing this text, even though we're a little past this, because I want you to think about it. I want you to think about these two reasons, about our relationship to the outside world, and then how we create our internal society. These are themes that are going to pop up throughout Bereshit. They're kind of the driving force behind this entire Brit. Okay, so I thought it was important to look at it. And now back to our regular program, okay? I'm sorry, I had to give that. I just couldn't skip it. Back to our regular program, which is where we left Moshe standing at Har Sinai. And you guys remember from last time, Moshe kept saying, I didn't want this job. You made me an intermediary. I could have sat on the side. You could have had a direct divine revelation, panim bepanim, but you didn't want it. But last time we looked at those words, we didn't focus on one part of it. And that is a verb that kept on coming up over and over again when Moshe described Har Sinai. And that verb is Shema, listening. The audio experience at Mount Sinai. I've highlighted every time here you see the word Kishmachem v'kol shamanu lishmoa shema kol u'shemat kol asher yamar Hashem v'shamanu v'asinu. Over and over again, Moshe emphasizes the listening that happened at Har Sinai. If you recall, in Sefer Shmot, in Exodus, the experience at Har Sinai is very different. It's not just about listening, it's about seeing and using all the senses, right? There's like lights and fire and thunder and lightning. There's a whole show going on. But here, we don't see that. Moshe doesn't talk about the thunder and the lightning and the image and seeing God's image. Here, it's about listening to God's voice. And why? I think it's because listening is connected to learning. And learning is about creating a relationship between the person talking and the recipient. And the listening is juxtaposed to the seeing. Seeing, sight could be deceptive. It doesn't last. Theta ego can come right after. But listening is something that sticks in your head and you have to think about it and you need to talk about it. And I think Moshe is trying to tell them, if you want to transmit this message, if you want this to become a heritage, right, your heritage that is passed down generation to generation, it has to be about teaching and listening. That's the only way your kids are going to get this message. You're constantly needing to talk about it. Just like you heard at Har Sinai, your children are going to have to hear over and over again. And Judaism is really predicated upon this principle of teaching and listening and talking. And this principle is what brings us right into our next section, where we're heading right now. Okay, so we finished section 1. We're ending with this idea of listening, speaking, hearing, okay, teaching. And that goes right into the Torah section. And the first thing we're going to see is the most famous phrase of listening, which is Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, the Shema. So let us look at this famous text right now and try to understand what is going on in this Torah section and the different types of laws that we're going to be seeing and dealing with. Okay? So we are starting now in Perek Vav, and Perek Vav begins with the words. First, I want to stop 1 second and see if there are any questions or comments. Okay, feel free to interrupt me. I know I'm going fast because I have a lot to say here. Perek Vav begins with Vizot HaMitzvah HaChukim VeHaMishpatim Asher Tziva Adonai Elohechem Lelamed Etzchem La'asot Be'eretz Asher Etem Ovrim Shama Lirishta. 3 categories: Mitzvah, Chukim, and Mishpatim.
Can you translate those, please, Sarah?
That's exactly what I'm going to attempt to do. These are really hard to translate. What is the difference between a mitzvah, a chok, okay, the commandments, the chukim, which I'm going to have a hard time translating, and a mishpat? Does anyone want to get a stab at it? Or has anyone ever heard any of these words before and want to try to say like what they've heard about them and how they've been explained before? What traditionally has a chok been? Or what do you see in the word mishpat? I think traditionally, if you would ask people, they would say, oh, a chok is a mitzvah that you don't know the reason you do it. So it's just an action you do. Like, for example, keeping kosher, right? We don't know why, but we have to do it. And the word mitzvah today is used to describe everything that we do in Judaism. Everything from lighting Shabbat candles, saying kiddush, keeping kosher, to giving charity, to just being nice to someone. We say, oh, just do a mitzvah. So it's used in this broad way. So I would like to offer a different paradigm, okay, for these 3 categories that I think fits with the author's intent. And we're going to use these definitions in the next 2 classes going forward. And the following is how I want to understand it for the sake of this class, okay? We're going to start backwards. The word mishpatim comes from the word mishpat, okay, which is justice or righteousness. And these are universal laws that have absolutely nothing to do with Judaism in nature. Every decent society has mishpatim. They have to do with how to create a just society. Do not murder, do not steal, do not rape, right? These are all mishpatim. Chukim are rituals. And a ritual is a mode of worship unique to a particular religion or culture. It's an action. It has to be an action, and it has to be a mode of worship, and it has no moral or ethical component to it. Okay, that's really important to remember, right? So if you're American, you eat turkey on Thanksgiving, that's a ritual. It makes no sense to anyone who's not American, right? Just like it wouldn't make sense for a non-Jew to make kiddush on Shabbat. There would be no point. We wouldn't encourage that. We don't even want that. We say, no, that's a ritual. You only do that if you are Jewish, you have to do a ritual. And mitzvah, in this context, I'm going to argue, is about a feeling of love and devotion. It is not an action. It's about what is going to spur keeping those chukim and mishpatim. What's the starting point of our relationship with God? Now, how these 3 categories interact with each other is going to be very fascinating. You can see I made a little Venn diagram because we have some laws that cross over and fit into more than one category. For example, giving charity, you could say is a mishpat. It makes sense. It's universal. Every society gives charity or holds it up as a value. But the way that we give charity is going to become ritualized because you have to give it in the mikdash at a certain time of the year in a certain way. So even mishpatim can have a ritualistic component to it. Okay, and we're going to see that a lot. There's going to be some crossover between them. For example, doing rituals sometimes require the feelings of devotion and love. And so you need a mitzvah and a chok to overlap as well. So that is going to be a fascinating thing for us to investigate as we look at all these laws together, I want you to really think about these categories and think about whatever we're learning, what category does it fit into? And should it have been in a different category? And then why not? Okay, that's going to be a question we ask ourselves. Do I have any questions about these three categories and how I explain them? Great. Because now we get to start with the first mitzvah. And this is where we've been going the whole time. The famous Shema. Okay. I'm going to read it slowly. I'm actually not going to translate it because I think we might get stuck in a translation and the translation is not so clear. We're going to ask a lot of questions about it. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levacha b'chol nafshecha b'chol ma'atecha. V'hayu hadvarim ha'ela asher nochi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha. V'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha u'v'veitecha u'v'lechtecha b'derech u'v'shavtecha u'kamecha u'kshartem liot al yadecha v'hayu l'tafot b'neinecha u'chtavtam al muzot beitecha u'v'sharecha. Okay. It seems simple, and so many people are familiar with these words, and yet there are so many problems here and so many questions about how to understand what these words really mean. Let's start with the first line, which is the most problematic. Shema Yisrael. Now the Shema is what we just talked about, right? What we saw at Ma'amad Har Sinai. It's all about listening. That's the whole lesson here. Listen and learn and pass it on. And what's this important lesson? Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Does someone want to throw out, how would they understand that? How would you translate that? There's no right and wrong way because it's almost impossible to translate. I'll use the JPS translation here. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Except if that's what it really was supposed to say in Hebrew, then it should have said, Adonai hu Eloheinu, Adonai hu Echad. And it could have easily said, Adonai Eloheinu Echad. It didn't need a comma in between. So this is a problem. The grammar doesn't make sense. We are not going to go through all the solutions of all the commentators because that's not the point of this class. But I'm bringing up that it's a problem, and we'll go back to understand this, how to understand this philosophically, but it's grammatically very problematic.
Before you go into the grammar or even the philosophy, could this not be on the simplest level a statement of theology where you've come from an Egyptian society that had a variety of gods, the god of the sunshine, the god of the rains, the god of the storm, the god of the harvest, and we don't believe in a polytheistic belief system. Above and beyond all of those powers is the power we call God.
Okay, I'm going to deal with that in like 1 minute. I think I agree with some of what you said, but not all of it. I don't think it's talking, I agree. I think the way I'm going to read it is it's an oath loyalty treaty. Okay, so I'm going to read it within the context of like the 6th century treaty structure. I don't know if it's making a theological statement. So wait for that. Okay, Mark, bring that up in 1 second. Okay. I want to focus on the rest of the lines. Let's just go through it briefly. So once you make this declaration of Adonai Elohim Adonai Echad, v'ahavta, you shall love this God. Now, is that a command? Like you shall love, and I'm commanding you to love? I would like to read it more as, so you shall love God. I think that's actually the correct reading. By doing all these things that I tell you, you shall come to love God. And how are you supposed to love God? 3 ways. With all your leiv, with all your nefesh, and with all your ma'od. So that's all your heart, all your soul, and all your ma'od, might. We'll see what that means. Now, again, commentators go crazy here trying to understand what these words mean and what could be referring to. I don't even think we need to look at any commentators because the text tells us exactly what it means. We could just look at the pshat, the plain meaning of the text, and it gives us its own internal commentary on those words. Because how do you love God with your lave? Well, it tells us, look at the green and the green, right? Pasuk Vav. Put them on your heart. So how do you love with your heart? Okay. It's an emotion. You put them on your heart. It's a feeling of love. That's it. There's no action to do. It's just about how you feel. And how do you do something with all of your nefesh? That's your personhood. It's everything about you. But nefesh could also be your children, the souls that you create. You teach them to your children and you talk about them wherever you're going. That's what it means to do it with your nefesh. It's like your whole being, your whole personhood. And your whole personhood includes your children. They are part of your personhood. And how do you do it with your whole ma'od, with your might or all your means? Well, what do? You put it on your arms, you put it on your home, you put it on your biggest investment. You put it on your house, your resources. You use your might, you physically put it on your body. So when we read it all together, there's this fully integrated approach to loving God that uses all of our humanity. We think about it on our hearts, we talk about it with our children, we bind it to our bodies, and we use our house and our resources. We've touched upon every aspect of our humanity in order to show our love and devotion. It's all encompassing at all times. And I think that that's the pshat. I'm not getting into a lot of like extra commentary here because I think I want to like really get at what the author is trying to teach us here, what the message is. And it's supposed to be a full-bodied, full human experience of immersing oneself with God. Now, Mark, let's go back to your question of Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. How do we understand, how do we unpack this theology here? Okay, and I think that if you ask most people, they would say that this line is talking about monotheism. This is like the ultimate declaration of monotheism. It's became the creed. You know, this line almost defines Judaism in a way. I don't think that's actually what the pasuk is talking about. I don't think it's talking about monotheism here at all. In fact, throughout Sefer Devarim, the author, okay, acknowledges that there are other gods, and those other gods have powers. They might be real, but they're just not your way, B'nai Israel, right? It's not in your breeds. That's not your God. Your God needs to be unique. We worship one God, and we don't look at those other gods. So it's not monotheism, okay? For over and over again, we're going to see talking lots of texts talking about avodah zarah, idolatry. In some cases, when it talks about idolatry, it tells you not to do it because it's silly and it's a waste of time. Why bother? You can't make something with your hands and bow down to it. And then in other texts that we're going to see, you shouldn't do it, not because it's not real, but because that's not what you're supposed to be doing. It's not unique. And that goes back to the idea of ritual. It's a particular mode of worship. And if you want to worship God, you have to do it in his way, the way that God wants.
Why does the I'm sorry everybody for asking lots of questions. You can see that I'm really excited. I usually just sit passively in the classes, but I'm really into this. Why does, according to your thesis, the author use two different names then for God? If this is a statement less about monotheism and more about this is our personal God, why does it call him Adonai and then it calls him Eloheinu?
Okay, so I'm going to share the last comment I had now. This was going to be the punchline. I don't know if this is true. This is just a theory I've read. I was reading a lot of scholarship about this and trying to understand what the conception, what the ancient theological understanding was. So I read this theory and it resonates with me. I think they might be onto something. Daniel Zucker writes about this in the Torah.com, but there's lots of other scholarship about this. One possibility is that the Assyrians in the 6th century assigned numbers to their different gods. Okay, so, and it was actually from 1 to 60. 60 was considered like the top number. And then number 60 was actually the first God. It was like the supreme God. So they had this whole number system where 60 corresponded to 1, and then 59 corresponded to 2, and okay, whatever, it's not so important. But the idea is that number 1 went to Ashur, and that was their God in Assyria. And in their text, they would use the numbers in order to reference their gods. Instead of writing out God's names, you would write like God number 1, God number 2, God number 3. And Israel, being a vassal state of Assyria during this time, when this text was being compiled, probably had to go with that numbering system, or at least reference it, or pretend to reference it, right? And so when it says Adonai Echad, it might be saying Adonai is number 1, like Ashur, like the number 1 God, but it might also be a wink wink that this Jewish author had, or Israelite author had, to the audience, to its Israelite audience, that we don't really believe that Ashur is number 1. We still believe in Yud Kei Vav Kei. So it's a way of placating the vassal state, the superpower, giving into their system, but also retaining our own theology and kind of sneaking it in. And that explains the strange grammar of Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, that it's speaking to 2 audiences at once. So it's a wild theory. I don't know I wonder, like, Mark, how you think about this. We obviously don't know if this was the intention, right? We have no idea, but it does speak to that time period and how gods were numbered and related to and spoken about.
It's a theory I am not familiar with,
Mhm.
and this is the first time I'm hearing it. I am listening politely, and listening is all about Shema, and that's what this whole book is about: learning and listening.
Learning.
I'm gonna think about that for a week or 2.
Okay.
And
Mhm.
the jury's out. I'm not going to pass judgment right now. I'm going to think about it, and there's clearly more reading that can broaden my horizons.
Another way of reading it is that this is an oath of loyalty, which fits again with the 6th century reading of a treaty, which is what they were familiar with back then. And when you wrote a treaty with your overlord as a vassal state, you had to commit and say, you are my God and my only God, and I won't follow any other gods. Just like you told your overlord, we are a vassal state and we will not become a vassal state to another country. You're the only country that we will allow to rule over us, right? And that was common. So to someone in the 6th century, this formulation would make perfect sense because they've seen this before. This wasn't unique. This was a common phrase that you saw in many texts. Now, of course, there are other famous understandings, like the Rambam reads this as philosophical monotheism, as God being unity and oneness and the first cause, right? And indivisible. I like the Rambam, but I think that the Rambam is an anachronistic reading because that's not what the text here is talking about. It doesn't know about medieval philosophy or Aristotelian philosophy. So I really don't like reading later Jewish philosophy into biblical texts. I like to stick with the biblical text that we have in front of us and figure out really what it means in the ancient Near East context. Okay. One more point about this is, what does it mean to love God? Right? Like, how do we turn on this? Like, do we have a love button? Do we know when we love God? What is it talking about? And here I also want to bring in another idea that fits with the ancient Near East context of the 6th century from Professor John D. Levinson, who explains that the word love is seen in many treaties, again, going back to the vassal states and the overlords, where the lesser country has to love its master. Now, that's kind of crazy, right? Does Assyria think that Judea is going to love its country? No, they're indebted to them. So what does the word love mean in those contexts? There, it's never talking about an emotion. It's always about obedience. That's it. So perhaps we have been misreading this pasuk our entire lives. Perhaps it's not about loving God, perhaps about showing obedience, showing loyalty. So it's not a philosophical statement about the nature of God. This is more about the relationship that we have to God, right? And how are we going to show our obedience and our loyalty? Well, we're going to do it with all of the laws that Moshe is about to show us that all relate to our levavecha, our nafshecha, and our meodecha, right? As we said before, our whole humanhood, our whole humanity, everything about us when it comes to our relationships, our bodies, our homes, everything now is going to be about showing obedience to God.
Could I make another comment? And I promise the rest of the students I'm going to be
You can
quiet.
talk as much as you want. Go.
I'm very conscious that I'm talking a lot. Could it be that before we throw the baby out with the bathwater, and when the Torah says, "V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha," you will love God, before we say, no, that doesn't mean love, that means obedience. Could it not be that there is a two-step process here to love, and that the first step can be obedience? You love God, as you have what I find quite compellingly showed in the green and the pink and the orange. You love him with your lev and with your nefesh and your ma'od in these fashions. It's an obedience. It's a behavioral, I'm upholding my responsibilities of commitment towards you by being obedient. But step one. But what that then leads to, it's very much akin to the medieval text, the Sefer HaChinuch, the book of mitzvah education, who coins and uses this phrase very often, that in accordance with one's activities, one's thoughts will then follow. And by behaviorally engaging in activities, our emotions are then drawn along, and that will create an emotional love that we have towards God.
I could read it like that, because I like that you're not changing what v'ahavta means, but you're saying that naturally that progression of, let's say, using every one of our resources, and when you're so devoted to a cause, you're going to become emotionally invested in that cause, and you're going to have feelings, right? I mean, we could say it's like a marriage, and when you show the commitment and you do the acts and you buy the gifts and you honor the person, it naturally is going to lead to feelings of love and attachment. So yes, I believe that perhaps that's exactly what the text is saying. And it's not commanding you to love, it's commanding you to do these things, and then hopefully a relationship will develop.
The argument for obedience seems to me to be more evident because of the 6th verse that says command. I command you. When you command somebody, you assume obedience.
Yes, I think you're 100% right. Asher enochi mitzavcha, that I'm commanding you, there's a sense of loyalty and obedience, and these are actions to be done. Which was why I like this reading, because I have a hard time with commanding love, right? And commanding an emotion. I can't, it's too hard for me to accept that.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Now, before we look at the next slide, can anyone here guess or anticipate or just take a jab at this? What could potentially break this bond? Or what do you think the greatest fear is? What do you think Moshe's greatest fear of Bnei Israel breaking this bond? What will cause it? What does he have to be most worried about in life? It might surprise you, but take a guess. Just throw something out. What will mess this all up?
To worship other gods.
Yes, but what's going to cause that? You're right. It's going to worship other gods, but why? Why are they going to leave this relationship to worship other gods?
Disasters, the unknown, events that they don't control.
I was hoping you were going to say that. That's great, because that's what I would expect. And instead, it's something shocking. It is actually what's going to happen. You're going to go into the land and you're going to have these great cities and these towers and all this wealth, right? And overflowing abundance and v'achalta, v'savata, you're going to eat and you're going to be satisfied. And it's only once you achieve success that you are going to forget God. That is Moshe's biggest fear right now. His biggest fear is that life will be too good. And once you forget who is giving you all this abundance, then you go and you worship other gods, because worshiping other gods is a form of self-worship. You're worshiping something that is man-made, right? You make something with your hands and you worship it, you're worshiping yourself. And you'll forget that God is the source of all this wealth that you have. This becomes a major theme throughout Bereshit that Moshe is constantly warning them against. You're about to enter this incredible land and you have no idea how good life is going to get for you. And now I'm scared that you will lose God. Now, I'm sure that many people are familiar with the two paragraphs of the Shema, which don't appear in the text next to each other. One is at the beginning of our section in Perek Vav, and the other is at the very, very end in Yud Aleph. And Chazal took both these paragraphs, copy, paste, and put them in our Siddur next to each other. And the reason they did that is because they're actually very similar, which is why sometimes when I'm saying them, I get mixed up. I don't know if this has ever happened with you guys, but you're in the middle of one paragraph and then you're like jump to the other and you forget which one you're saying because they're really confusing. They sound the same. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, le'ahavat Adonai Elohecha. B'chol levacha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol matecha sounds like b'chol levavchem, b'chol nafshechem. V'hayu hadvarim ha'ela asher nochi mitzavcha hayom al levecha sounds just like v'samtem et dvarei ela al levchem v'al nafshechem. And then we have b'shiv t'choi techa, l'tzvoi derech, shav t'kamecha. We have those exact same words on the left side as well. So you could see I color-coded it. They clearly parallel each other. The only major difference that throws us off is what I put in bold in the middle, okay? And that is that God is going to give you dew, and he's going to basically bless you with this abundance and in these grains and everything, right? So you're going to flourish in the land. And then be careful, lest you worship other gods, because then God will get angry and he will stop the rain. And the land will not give you any produce, and you will lose all this abundance that you will get. So that is missing. That warning is missing from the first paragraph of the Shema. And traditionally, the way to understand it, that it's a warning. If you do the mitzvot, then you will be blessed. And if not, then God will punish you. But I think that actually there's another way to read this that fits in with what we were just saying, what we just saw in the previous slide. This isn't an if-then. It doesn't say over here, if you do idolatry, then I will punish you. Instead, all the psukim here flow. It's like a run-on sentence that I will bless you with abundance, and then you will seek out other gods, and then God will be upset with you. Right? It's that trap. It's what we just talked about. Okay, the trap of success. And by the overabundance, you might lead right into thinking that you did it yourself, and then you'll lose God. And the message here really is you will become affluent and forget God. So you need to keep this in your mind all the time. But what's the solution? What's the solution to this trap, right? I think we could all connect to this trap of success. I think this is something very much that our society could relate to, that we are so blessed and we live such wonderful lives that it's easy to forget God. So what is the solution, right? How are we going to avoid this? And the solution is precisely the paragraph of the Shema, which is talk about it, educate your kids, engage in ritual. Love is not enough. It's not just about feelings and emotions. No, you need to have concrete actions, right? And it has to be in our house, in our bodies, in our children. We have to study the laws. We have to think about them. We need to have a machloket over them. They need to become part of our daily discourse. And that, to me, is what the entire section is about. This whole mitzvah section. Okay, hold on. I'm going to go back a second to this slide. So this whole mitzvah section that we've been doing, this duties of the heart and the Shema, to me, the overall message is, if one wants to have that connection with God, and we want to show her right, then we have to be obedient, and we have to make it all-encompassing and use our entire humanity in that effort. And only then will the other things stick. Only then will you have, a chance at passing it down to your children. So that is how I sum up the mitzvah section. And now I would like to start the ritual section. Okay. I know we're getting a lot in here. Take a look now at the ritual section. The ritual section begins with Ela hachukim vehamishpatim. What here is missing, guys? Which word is missing that we saw before?
Savacha.
Well, no, not. It's actually one of the three categories.
Mitzvot. There are no mitzvot here.
No mitzvot here, right? I'm going to go back in my slide. Hold on a second. Take a look over here. V'zot ha-mitzvah ha-chukim v'mishpatim, all three of them. And now I'm jumping ahead to our new section, Ela ha-chukim v'mishpatim, because we did the mitzvah section. It's behind us, right? We're done with that section, and now we're going to start the new section focusing on chukim and mishpatim. So now we're up to rituals and societal laws. Okay, it's beautiful how it just goes. And I'm not even going to show you my slide yet. I'm not going to tell you what the rituals are, okay? But I want you guys to take a guess. Just throw out some rituals. What do you think the ritual section will look like? What do you think it's going to be about?
Putting on tefillin.
Okay, so that's what you would expect. Yep.
Observing
Anything-
Shabbat. Observing
Shabbat.
Shabbat.
Exactly.
Putting on the mezuzah on the doorposts of your home.
Right. You'd expect that. What other rituals? Think of other rituals that we do or things in the Torah.
Davening.
Light.
Davening.
Well, davening is actually connected because davening is connected to the Beit HaMikdash. So we are going to see Mikdash here. Yes.
Observing the 10 Commandments.
Yes, we already saw that before in the previous parak, but it's along those lines. Yeah. And what
Bringing
we're gonna-
sacrifices.
Sacrifices. You would think it would be lots of sacrifices. Exactly. Right. And I think you're going to be a little surprised with what you guys see. Okay. It starts with talking about the Mikdash, this future place that you're going to go to. But that makes sense because ritual revolves around the Mikdash. That's a ritualistic activity. Okay. And the text tells us when you go into the lands, okay, the first thing you need to do is destroy all the mikamot, the places where the other nations did their idolatry. That's the very first thing. It's like you cross that Jordan River, get out your sledgehammer and just start destroying all of their altars. That's number one. Okay. But notice it doesn't tell you not to do idolatry. It tells you to destroy their physical remnants of idolatry. Why? Like, why not reuse it? Let's be like a little environmentally friendly here. Why can't we just take it and turn it into a Jewish ritual? Why can't we take an altar and make it into a Jewish altar? Why can't we just appreciate a temple and turn it into a museum? Right? What is this about, like destroying everything? And I think the answer is because, remember, ritual is about modes of worship. It's how you worship. And the greatest fear the author has here is that they will see something and then use it as a mode of worship, even if they're serving God. They might have the best intentions. They might love God. They really might worship, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but they see an altar and they say, okay, we'll do it that way. It's already there. Let's not build a new one. And the whole idea of ritual is a mode of worship. It's an action, how you do it. And the idea here is you need to do things in a very particular way, exactly how I tell you, not how they did it. It's going to be how I tell you to do it. And how do I tell you to do it? And here comes a very mysterious pasuk. Ti'im el hamakom asher yibchar Hashem mikol shiftechem lasum et shemo sham lishichno tidrashu ubata shama. Go to the place that God will choose in order to put his name there, and that will be his dwelling place, and you shall seek him there, and everyone shall go. What is this mysterious place? Hamakom asher yivchar Hashem. Why not just say the name of the place? Where is this place that God's name rests?
Wherever you build it and respect it.
Exactly. So maybe it's not one place, it's wherever that place shall be. And that might be many places. Because we see when they first enter the land, they first create a Mishkan at Shiloh. After that, it moves to Kiryat Ye'arim. And after that, finally to Jerusalem. But you're right, it's not just one place, it's the place that you create. Why else do you guys think the author here is not naming a place?
Possibly because they're waiting for us also to choose that place. There's a famous midrash of David and Shmuel who sat there a whole night trying to figure out where the Beit HaMikdash should be built. But they had to make that first, it's like Abraham. Abraham had to decide. So that it doesn't, God will decide, but we have to be part of that decision. Otherwise,
Exactly. So we have two audiences here in the text, right? We have the literary audience, that's us reading it, or someone in the 6th century reading it, who knows what that place is going to be, because that's part of the decision between us and the people. But we also have the narrative audience, that's the people in the text, Bnei Israel, standing hearing the speech. And for them, they have no idea. It wouldn't make sense for them to hear about this name of the place yet. It would be like, jumping ahead in history a few hundred years.
Isn't there a kind of dilemma of a specific place and God being everywhere?
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that for the author of Sefer Devarim, God is going to be located somewhere, he actually is going to be everywhere. That's actually, I think, one of the most important theological points of our text. That God is not going to be found in the Mikdash. And we're actually about to go with that idea right now. So thank you for bringing that idea up. Okay. Well, first, actually, I was going to throw out a question. What are some of the pros and cons of having centralized practice? At this point in time, Bnei Israel in the Midbar, there is no centralized practice. They are allowed to do karbanot wherever they want. They can give a karban in their backyard. They don't have to go to the Mishkan. But Moshe is saying in the future, there's going to be centralized practice. In fact, if you look at the last pasuk, he says, when you go into the lands and you're settled and you're safe and there's betach, that means you're safe. So we're not even talking about once they enter the land. We're talking about a few hundred years later. You have to first conquer the land. You have to make sure it's safe. You have to feel secure. Only once you feel secure can you have centralized practice. Because you're not going to leave your house in the Golan to visit the Mikdash if you feel like someone can come and steal or attack your farm, right? You're not going to leave your children behind on the farm. So it comes from a place of security. So we're talking about the far, far distance. Only then can you build a Mikdash. Now, back to my question. What are some of the pros and cons? Just throw it out, guys. What are some good things about having one location and some bad things about having one location?
one location is potentially dangerous insofar as if that location is subject to overthrow, you've lost everything.
Everything, exactly, right? And you know what, let's go with all the negatives. One location, as you just mentioned, you know, that puts it's putting all your eggs in one basket. It makes ourselves a little vulnerable. Number two, it's really far away from a lot of people.
Yeah,
So
but
people are
how
gonna
can
be
you
less
get
than,
there?
yeah, how are you gonna
can't
get there? It's really hard, right? It's really, really hard because like if I live, you know, 7 hours away from Yerushalayim, am I really gonna leave everything and go to the Mikdash? How often am I gonna make it there? So that's a serious burden on the people. I also want to point out that power corrupts, as we all know. And having all the power located in one location is the potential for corruption. There are also high maintenance costs, and it puts a lot of strain on the people because now the whole priestly class has to be supported, and it creates distance between the people and the ritual.
Maybe there's jealousy for those who do not have in their territory the special sanctuary. And the sub cousin of that idea is that for those in the faraway environs, it creates apathy of,
100%.
that's for them, that's not for us.
Right. So that is actually correct. And it's these problems that Moshe addresses right now. He realizes these problems and he's going to talk about them right away. So instead of seeing all those laws that you guys said, which is what I would have expected to see, right? I thought now, okay, we're talking about centralized practice. I thought we were going to talk about the Karbanot and the laws of the Kohanim and what the Leviim roles are. And, you know, how do we support them? And what happens in the Beit HaMikdash? Instead, we're going to see the complete opposite. Okay, I wrote down a list of the main laws that we see in this section because I knew it would be too much to go through everything. We can't read so many prakim in 1 hour. And the first thing is that, well, now that you can eat meat, now that there's a mikdash, you're allowed to eat meat outside of the mikdash. We can have home barbecues. Before that, they were not allowed to eat meat. If you wanted to eat meat, you had to go to the Mishkan and you had to ask the Kohen to give a karban so that you could have your hamburger. That was the only way. But now there's going to be a concept of sacred meat and secular meat. Meat that I eat as a ritual and meat that I eat because I'm celebrating my birthday party at home. Next, they have to physically destroy all the idolatry that they see. Again, that's going back to the idea of the modes of worship, anything physical. 3, they have to be really careful of people who influence you to worship in different ways. So you have to get rid of pagans and false prophets and family members who are dangerous or entire cities who might convince you to do different rituals. Okay. Next, you have to be an am segula, which means that you have your own way of acting when it comes to your body. That means what you do to your body, what you eat. These are all rituals. Next, you have to give tzedakah. Now you might say, wait a minute, Sarah, giving tzedakah, that sounds a little like a mishpat, right? That sounds like something that everyone does, except you're going to do it in a ritualistic way. You're going to give maaser, you're going to go to the Beit HaMikdash, and there's going to be oversight for how you give it. You are also going to consecrate your firstborn animals to God. That's a ritual. And lastly, you're going to keep the holidays. Holidays are rituals. Now, what's going on here? All right. We weren't expecting this. We thought we were about to talk about the Beit HaMikdash. Why are we talking about this instead? And with this, allow me to go 2 minutes over time. Is that okay, Mark? I'm just going to give my synopsis. Okay.
You
This
didn't
is
start
how-
on time, so it's okay.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. So, okay. I'm allowed to take a few more
It's
minutes.
great. Keep going. It's great.
Okay. For this, I'm going to give you my take based on like all the readings I've done of how if I take a step back, what do I think the message of this entire section is? What is this ritual section trying to teach us? Because I thought it was going to be all about the Mikdash, and it's not. Okay, and these are 5 takeaways that I called from the psukim. Number 1 is that when we say Hamakom Asher Yivchar Hashem, the place that God will rest, the psukim over and over say that God's name will rest there, his shame, but not God. Okay, in Devarim, the theology of Devarim is that God doesn't rest anywhere. God is out there. God is up in the Shemayim. God is far away. God wasn't at Har Sinai, and God is not in the Mishkan. These are just places where you have an encounter with God, where you worship God. But it's not where God is found. Okay, which is fascinating because on the one hand, Sefer Devarim is promoting this idea of centralized practice, but it's also downgrading the idea of what that centralized place is. I'll say that again because I think it's so important. While it's pushing for centralized practice, that center becomes downgraded. It's not actually where God is, right? It actually limits the importance and significance of that place. So it sounds almost like an internal contradiction. There's a tension here between what this centralized place is. Another thing I think that we can get from these psukim is that religious experiences can happen outside of the Mikdash. While the Beit HaMikdash is important, religious life happens at home. It's about your body, right? It's about giving tzedakah. It's about what you eat. It's about how you connect to the people around you. And that is really profound. Next, the Mikdash plays a supporting role in the service of God, but it's only a supporting role. It's not the end all and be all, right? It's a means to an end. It's not an end in and of itself. Which is why we could say there's no mention of karbanot here. That's not the point of it here. We don't care about karbanot because the people aren't doing the karbanot. That's for the Kohanim and Leviim. And this is all about your average farmer, how your average regular Israelite relates to God. It's about how he worships God in his field, in his home, in his community, not in the Mikdash. In fact, whenever we mention the Kohanim and Leviim in Sefer Devarim, they're always lumped together with the marginalized people. Over here, we have to give ma'aser, that's 1/10, okay? And who you giving it to? The Levi, the Ger, and the Yitom, and the Almanah. That's someone from the tribe of Levi, and a foreigner, and an orphan, and a widow. That's all we know about the Kohanim and Leviim from Sefer Devarim, that they're poor, that they need our help. They don't have this high status. They aren't special. We don't hear about their clothing. We don't hear about their jobs. We don't hear about their important role. We just hear about the fact that they are marginalized and you have to take care of them. The totally different understanding of who they are. And lastly, we read that it's the nation, it's the land and the brit, the covenant, that are the modes through which the secular becomes sacred. That everyday life has the potential to be infused with sacredness. I'm going to quote here from Professor Baruch Alster, who writes, rather than strengthening the temple cult, Deuteronomy actually weakens it, while strengthening the religious value of the nation of Israel and its covenant with God and observance of God mitzvot, which takes place throughout the entire land, not just in the temple. So the ironic twist in this whole story is that what we thought was going to be all about the temple ends up being about things that happen outside of the temple and things that are just relate to the common everyday life of the average person in Bnei Israel. And I put on the bottom there, secularization and sacralization. And a lot of scholars deal with both of these two different sides that seem to be in tension. Some scholars see Sefer Devarim as secularizing the sacred, and others see it as the secular becoming sacred. So in other words, there are two ways to look at it. Either we take things out of the mikdash and we make them part of our everyday life, or we take things that are our everyday life and we give them kedusha and we make them special. I think both are true. I think the scholars on both sides are actually true. I think that's the entire point. What's going on here is that there's this, there isn't a strict boundary. There's no strict border between the mikdash and the people, right? Everything from the mikdash is going to permeate outside of the mikdash, and everything that people do in their life has the potential to become ritualistic. I have an idea. I didn't see it anywhere. I'd like to share with you guys as well. So feel free to totally disagree with me because this is just my theory. I was thinking about it that in the Midbar, the emphasis is always on the people's tents, the Ohalim. They're always going back to their tents, right? There's a lot of personal space. And then what we're being told here is that once they enter the land, we're going to have the centralized place, and that's going to unite the people. And then after the Charban, after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, we don't have that anymore. Things move back into the home. And the home takes on a lot of those sacred aspects from the temple. We call the house a Mikdash Ma'at, like a mini temple, right? And we take the menorah and it turns into the Chanukiah. We take the Mizbeach and it turns into our Shabbat table. We take all these rituals from the Mikdash and we bring them back into our home. And I think, and where did Chazal get that idea from? How did they do that? I think they're picking it up from Sefer Devarim. I really think that this is the model for that shift, right, of religious experience, and for taking what's sacred and making it in the home, and for taking what's in the home and ritualizing it. So I think that this theory that we find in Sefer Devarim is part of our survival. It gave us the keys to figuring out how to survive in the diaspora and how to survive so many years after and how to keep ritual alive, because we're constantly evolving and looking and searching for ways to take everyday things in life and infuse it with sacredness through a ritual act.
If I could just make a quick comment, ritual is the glue that builds community in all societies.
100%.
And moving into the land of Israel, the issue of how do you maintain and build community, ritual is a very important part of that process.
100%. I was thinking about that as we build a new community, Beit Knesset here in Efrat, and we're trying to revive it. And I was literally thinking about that, of how do we take the ritual, and also post-corona, like so much of our ritual life moved into our home. How do we get it back into the community and have shared rituals together? And that's really the challenge, right? That's the tension. So any other comments? Very good. So thank
Sarah,
you for
this was exceptional. Let me just come in and thank you at the end. This was, I feel like, a roller coaster of information and approaches, and from a close reading of the text on the one hand to theological assumptions on the other, to a political, if I can use that word, of the inside the temple, outside of the temple, the land, centralization versus decentralization. This was an outstanding class, and I feel like what more could there possibly be to say on the Book of Devarim?
Oh, guys, get ready.
We're only
next week is my favorite.
We're only halfway.
Yeah, so next week is going to be in Mishpatim, which I think is the best, because it's all about the balance of powers within the government. And there's nothing more appropriate to our society today, especially if you're living in Israel or following the politics of what's happening here. This is going to be very apropos to our conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. This was outstanding. And I know I appreciated it so much. I'm sure other people here who are listening also did. And I can't wait for next Thursday. So
Very good.
thank you, Kol HaKavod. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. If you've been enjoying these classes, please bring a friend. I know it's 9 o'clock in the morning when we begin on Montreal time, but if you'd like to recommend these courses and classes, we have another 2 to go. And we thank you for joining us. Have a great day, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you very much. Looking forward, guys. Be well, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take
Have a
care.
good week,
you.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Shabbat
you.
shalom, everyone. Take care.
Sure.